So my name's Nikki. Hi, everyone. And we're so excited that you're here joining us today. We're going to be talking about a brand new open source toolkit that we recently announced and released. I've got Dorian Yeager on the line here, and he is the person behind the toolkit. So he developed this rapid stack framework, and today we're going to learn about it. We also have Andrew Brick on the line. He's one of our senior software engineers, and he's going to be helping with fielding those questions as we go. And then, of course, at the end, we'll read questions aloud and we'll do some live Q&A. And so with that, I will go ahead and tee us up. Dorian, first, can you tell our audience why you developed RapidStack and the problem that it solves?
Certainly. So I've been doing a lot of app development at home just for fun. And also, there were several things that I wanted to prototype at work. For one, we had a machine learning demo where we would set a camera on a ball valve. And when you threw the ball valve one way or the other, it would say whether it was turned on or off. So in this case, we needed a really simple web interface to get to that machine learning, that trained back end. So, and there's been other times too. We have a proof of payment system that uses blockchain and provides an escrowing mechanism for everyday people and companies, and eliminates the need for institutions like clearinghouses that otherwise are kind of unobtainable for the everyday person. So that was another instance of a site that we needed to prototype. We needed something built quickly. A lot of these times, you can't afford a huge team. You can't afford to spend a lot of time. And so getting something up and running quickly is very important. And as an individual, I needed something that's simply fun to work with, something that's approachable. I got tired of working with big, jangly stacks that require complex IDEs and APIs that if you were to print out in books would fill a library. Uh, we needed to get back to something approachable, fun to work with, fast. And today, in today's environment, what you want to build is a single page application that is highly reactive, and you want it to communicate with a web service backend. You need things like authentication. You need your tokenization, protected routes. For the front end, I've chosen to work with Vue.js. There are a lot of reasons for that, and we will look at some of those in depth here in a minute. But when we look at Vue.js, it gives us a lot of things. It gives us a command line interface to generate a front end that will take care of just about anything. But what does it not provide us? It doesn't provide us a simple back end of web services that we can connect to. It doesn't provide us any kind of back end data store, no user management, no authentication, no protected routes. All of these things are missing from a complete application. And so what I've done is I've built a complete application stripped down to the bare bones that provides all of those things. And it is all done inside of Docker containers. And what's nice about that is that as you flesh out your application, beginning on this boilerplate, once you're done, you have something that's ready to deploy into the cloud. And again, we can talk about that a little bit later. So that is the nature of what we have here. This is my personal toolbox. It is a boilerplate to build your next project. And again, anyone can get up and running with it very quickly. And unlike a lot of these promised frameworks, one thing about what I've done here is you will leave your host machine pristine. I'm not going to drag my muddy feet through your OS, leaving a bunch of libraries and dependencies behind. And that's really important. You want something you can stand up, play with, tear down, and be left fresh. That's what we're looking to do here.
Awesome. Thanks, Dorian. So why don't we jump into the demo?
Certainly. So first, I want to show you a little bit about my environment. What we've got here, I am running the latest version of Ubuntu in a virtual machine. If you don't have that yet, you could stand that up on your own machine in about an hour and a half. That was what I clocked it in at. From there, you can clone the Rapid Stack repo. And once you clone the Rapid Stack repo, this is what you're going to be left with. We have a directory for Flask apps. That's going to be where we store our back-end applications. We have a directory for Vue apps where you can store your front-end applications, because you could have more than one. And then we have a directory for Docker services. And the Docker services is what's going to stand everything up locally on your machine and host everything in a complete deployment so that you can poke around and play in it, right? That's very different than views like built-in development server, right? Here we're giving you a complete actual deployment that you can play with on your machine in real time. So in order to get the environment completely stood up, you don't have to go around grabbing individual dependencies like Python, pip3, Flask, and installing all of these things. They're provided for you in the Docker services. So let's go to Docker services and take a look there. So that is the other thing that you're going to need. So I assume that you have some sort of POSIX environment. It might be Linux, it might be Mac, something like that. You're going to need Docker and Docker Compose. Once you have those, you're good to go. So inside of here, if you just do Docker Compose up, if your images aren't built yet, it's going to go out and bring down absolutely everything that you need. And then it will stand up your Docker containers, right? So that's what this is going to look like. We see that we have a container for Nginx that's providing hosting of the front end application that we'll talk about, and micro WSGI bindings to the back end Python. We have a Flask backend. That is our app container for our Flask web services. And we also stand up Mongo to use as an object store. So that's what these three containers represent. So once that's up and running, let's take a look at what we have. So again, not very thrilling, but there's a lot being done here. I'm going to log out. One of the things to note, let me show you this real quick. Right now I'm logged out, meaning we blew away my local token. If I try to go to one of these, the about page is public, but if I try to go to home, it's protected. So it's going to reroute me back to the login page. I log in, and then it routes me where I originally wanted to go. So that's nice functionality. It's the functionality that you would expect out of a modern application. This app is basically the plain vanilla Vue app that you would get from generating from the CLI. I've simply extended it to add in the things that were missing. One thing that I did put on this home page is this little test link that hits the back end, which is always useful. But then otherwise, we see that we have just our account overview where we can log out, a create account page. That's it, an about page. Because again, we're stripped down to the boilerplate. You'll notice that there's no styling in here. I make no assumptions at that level for you. You could easily add Bootstrap, Vue, or any of these other styling frameworks that you wanted to use. But this is, again, meant to be just the starting point for your application. Okay, so at this point, I think we're ready to look at the project structure itself. So I'm going to open up VS Code. And this is another thing about my environment. I do use VS Code. We'll take a real quick look at my plugins. So I've got a Docker plugin, Python plugin. I've installed Vueter for my Vue work. And I've installed Vim plugins, Vim bindings, just to make my text editing easier. So looking back at the directory structure, if we look at, let's first look at our front end, right? And talk just briefly about it. You can learn a lot just by looking at the way these things work. Another thing that Vue doesn't give you out of the box is any kind of asynchronous calling mechanism to a backend. I've brought in Axios. Axios is what I chose to use. It's very popular. But if we look at this, here we have my login component, right? And you can see things down in here like how I post off to the back end, right? And we get our token back from the back end and we place it in local storage. This kind of information is very useful as you go to build out your application, because I've set a pattern and shown you how it's done. The other thing, you look at this router.js, right? You can see how I set up the routes inside the application, and I've added metadata to some of them, like it says requires auth. So if a route requires auth, look what it does. It jumps down here, it looks to see if you have a token. If you don't, it'll set where you wanted to go, right? We saw that earlier, and it'll route you to the login page. If you do have your token, you'll simply go straight to where you wanted to go. Again, all functionality that you would expect out of a modern application. I've also tried to adhere to Vue's Vue's way of doing things. We look inside of here under components. I created an account entry view that just takes a name and password, and you'll see that that gets reused inside of both the create account and the login. Not entirely necessary, but again, it helps reinforce this is how you can do things inside of Vue. So I've tried to follow best practices all the way through. Now, we've talked a little bit about the Vue app, and you could see how this would be easy to work in. And at this point, this isn't really a session to teach you how to use Vue. You could follow any tutorials online. You could bring in Bootstrap. You could very easily build out the things that you need from this point on the front end. What I'm more excited about and what I'd like to show you is the back end. The reason that I'm excited is that the back end is right here in this app.py file. It's a Python file, and it's just around 100 lines of code. We got 110 lines of code here. It's providing all this functionality. And I like the fact that there's no magic here. Everything is laid bare. You can see how your token is getting generated. You can see what the payload of the token. All of this is brought to the forefront. Now, obviously, as your app grew and you had a bunch of endpoints, you would want to split this out into multiple files. But from here, it's nice just to see, again, everything exposed. So you can see also, I've given you some nice things in here. I've this token required annotation. In Python, we call this a wrapper function. And you can see that right up here. So we can specify endpoints that are protected routes. So let's talk about everything that this backend is giving us. It's giving us very basic user management, right? It's giving us encrypted passwords. It's giving us our tokenization. We have our authentication, all of those things taken care of in this 100-line file. One of the nice things about this application stack, you can work at every level of it if you had nothing but a text editor. So it's all very simple. All of this is designed to just get out of the way. It's designed to get out of your way and let you do the things that you want to do. Python was chosen because it is a very old, established language that can do anything. There are tons of guides on it. It's very easy to pick up. If you follow what's going on here, there's really three things that you need to understand. You need to have a very basic understanding of Docker. You need to understand JavaScript and Python. These are three of the most popular technologies right now. And this is particularly useful if you're doing anything like machine learning that is typically done in Python anyway. Okay, so now that I've shown you kind of the front end and the back end, suffice to say, all of this is tied together. Oh, wait, one more thing before we go on. Um, Also in the back end, it will be important. You'll see there's this config py file. If you decide to use this to create your own project, you see this secret key field here. You're going to want to tie that to an environment variable for your project. You're not going to want to commit that secret key to a GitHub repository. So I just wanted to throw that out there. That's a gotcha. Okay, so um, the other thing that I want to talk about, I promised that I would leave your machine pristine. So far,
Yeah,
that's true. When
Dorian,
we stood up, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say we have a question.
Oh, sure.
The question is, what database are you using at the back?
Mongo. It's MongoDB. Yeah. And let's take a look real quick. Mm, Services. Um, let's take a look at our Docker Compose real quick. Very simple. 40 lines. We see that you know, if you're not comfortable with Docker, think of this as standing up a network. And so for a lot of these, we just use plain vanilla containers from the repo. We've got the latest version of Mongo. We say, bring this up for us. Same thing pretty much with Nginx. The Flask backend is using a custom Docker image that I created because I wanted it to be super lean. We started Alpine and then we just build up the things that we need for Python and Flask. But when we run Docker Compose up, it's sending up all these Docker containers and connecting them together in a little bitty network inside of your computer. And it's putting it behind a firewall and exposing uh, it's exposing the front end so that you can get into it. And again, when you're done with all of your work, it would be very easy to hand this over to your client, your company, whatever, have them take your Docker files, move it into Swarm, and you're good to go. Are there any other questions at this point?
Nope.
Excellent. Okay, so again, at this point, I've kept your host machine clean, like I promised. You could tear down these Docker containers and erase them, and it would be like day one. I haven't polluted your machine with any specific version of Python, pip, Node, npm, none of these things. Uh, and that's the next point that I want to discuss, uh, because there's also, I think, new development methods that are important here. One of the things that I ran into at work, I would go from project to project, and as I did, the version of Node would be different, or different dependencies would conflict with each other on the host machine, and it became a real pain. And so, one of the things that I talked about with my friend and colleague Siju, we take our tool chain, everything that we need to build, test, all these things, we take that, we put that into a Docker container itself. That's a really cool idea, right? Because basically, if you can launch that Docker container and say, just let it stick around, then you can do a Docker exec IT and go into that thing. And it's almost like being inside of a virtual machine. Not quite the same because you're sharing the same kernel, right? But you're in an isolated environment. And from inside of there, you can run your build tasks, your testing tasks, and all of those things. And again, you keep it completely isolated. And so from project to project, they're not going to conflict with one another. And the best part is, on those elements that you don't specify a specific version, every time you build that Docker container for your tool chain, you're going to get the latest version of all software that you use in your tool chain. So that's incredibly beneficial. And also imagine that you have someone new rolling onto your project, right? You give them a POSIX environment with Docker Compose, you bring down your tool chain, you have them build it, they're up and running in minutes. So let's take a look at what that looks like for this project. So in our case, we have Vue. Vue does require a build environment. So if you look inside of Vue Apps, Vue App, you will see this file. You will see a Docker file in here, and you will see development Docker Markdown. So basically, if we go, let's go inside here. I'm just going to show you, if you were to do this command. Oh, nope, sorry, not that command. This command. If you do docker build and you reference this directory for the Docker file therein and tag it as view dev, this is what's going to build the tool chain that you need for the Vue CLI. And again, in this case, it's a very simple tool chain, right? Because all you need really, you need npm and to install the Vue CLI, right? Now I'm going to point out a couple things inside this Docker file that are important. We give it a user. We set it the envi, the UID and the GID, right? This needs to be your UID and GID on your host machine, right? Because what's going to happen here is when this environment generates any files or does any builds on the host machine, it will look like it came from you. This is how we get past any permissions issues. So again, so I've shown you how to build and tag the development Docker file. Now inside the Markdown file, I give you an example command that you could run to launch it. And I'm going to talk real briefly about it. Right now, what it does is it exposes port 80 to the back end, right? And it mounts the location of your Vue app to the app directory. And then it gives the container a name. So in your case, depending on where you placed the RapidStack repo, you would want to change where you're mounting your volume here. In terms of exposing the port, you don't have to do that. But if you are following the Vue tutorials online, it will have you running their development server. And this way you can still connect to it on your local machine and play around. If you plan to run this and all those backend Docker, the deployment Docker images that I showed you, you would want to change this port because they would come in conflict with each other, right? But I just want to take a, real quick, let's look at what this looks like. Oh, I already have the address in you, sorry. This is what I was just talking about. Let's let's bring these down. Okay. All right, so now if we run Docker PS, you can see that I have my development container running. We'll run this next command again that I give you inside this file. And what this is going to do, again, it's almost like dropping into a virtual machine. Now look, here we are. I have all of the things that I need to build my Vue application. And I haven't installed anything to the host machine. Now again, in this case, the tool chain is relatively simple, but as your project becomes more complex, that won't be true. And this is extremely useful. Like, you don't have to do this, but I highly recommend it. Are there any other questions for me at this point? Nikki, have we got anything going on?
I don't see any questions in the chat box right now, but if you guys have questions, just drop those in there and we'll address them as we go.
Okay, well, hard to believe that I've already talked for as long as I have. I guess the other thing that I would say, we've We've been successful with this. The people who have tried it have enjoyed it. Andrew, are you with me? Can you unmute?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent. So I would like Andrew. It's fine to hear me as the person who put this together kind of ramble about it, but I would like Andrew just to talk about how he's used it personally and professionally, and what his thoughts are on it.
Yeah, so I'm actually probably the developer who has used MicroStack most after Dorian. With several of my colleagues, we've set up payment apps, and I'm actually teaching someone how to build an e-commerce site using MicroStack right now. It's going very well, and I would credit the reason why it's going very well is one thing that I feel that MicroStack has that a lot of other stacks don't is transparency. Dorian mentioned the exposure and generation of JWT tokens, which define your login and session and stuff like that. And really, that stuff is extremely, I think, to a lot of developers, especially to a lot of new developers, it's very, opaque. It's very hard to understand what exactly is going on there. And Dorian has consolidated that down to basically two functions in that backend that he showed us. And you know, they definitely have some technical jargon in them, but they're short functions. They're very like understandable, and I think that that's really cool. Another thing that I really like about this stack is that Vue sort of, because of the nature of Vue, it sort of forces you to build minimal viable products every step of the way. Every Vue component, every Vue page is effectively its own program, and the way that Vue is rendered is it basically considers each one of these components as independent entities that coexist on the same page. And that's what I think is, it's really that sort of Lego building block style thing that I think is why so many of us programmers got into this industry. Is it's just very easy to see where things belong and where their functionality comes from. Something else I really, really like about this stack is I found when I was using things like mean stack or mern stack or other popular full stacks, is everything is in JavaScript, which is great because I'm a JavaScript engineer. But I gotta say it's a little confusing when your backend and your front end are both JavaScript. You can get a little bit lost in what's communicating with what. Just navigating around the directory, I find that I always know what's going on the page, because if it's Python, it's backend. If it's JavaScript, it's front end, and like it's as simple as that. And having that distinction is actually super powerful. I think also what it's really good for when it comes to new developers is demystifying how programming languages talk together. Right? Everything is being sent over Axios through these JSON objects, and that is like a learning experience that is pretty underplayed. I think when people start to learn programming, I think a lot of people start and they learn maybe the beginnings of one language, but it kind of gets lost how this language has to do with functionality or whatever else it is that you're not immediately using it for. This makes it really clear how everything cooperates together. It makes it really clear what Docker is for. It makes it really clear, and I think maybe my favorite part about this whole thing is just how few lines of code are able to accomplish so much. That's really probably the single biggest advantage of MicroStack. Is it's so little code, and it's so transparent, and it's still full stack. It's still end to end. There's nothing like outside of things of like massive enterprise scale. There's no reasonable size web app, even for medium scale, that I don't think you could deploy with this in dramatically faster time than I think most of the alternatives. Even when we're talking about like Node backends, I still would probably prefer using this for standing up a brand new app, which is precisely why I've started pursuing using this in multiple personal projects right now. First thing I did when instructing a student of mine as to how this works is we just went through, because there are so few of them, we just went through every file and we discussed what every single file is for. And you know what? Almost never before in a full stack app have I like bothered to do that, because there's always some superfluous or esoteric file that I don't really know what its purpose is, but it doesn't really matter to me. But this is so much better. There's so much more clarity. There's so much more transparency. And I think when it comes to new developers or people just trying to get something out the door, I like really don't know a better stack than MicroStack right now, or Rapid Stack. I'm sorry.
This is funny, yeah, because you said MicroStack a couple times, so that must have been the old name.
That was the old name. We have similar products in house, and it kind of we needed more brand distinction, and also Rapid Stack more fully describes the experience. We're trying to rapidly build things up, try things out, tear things down, and again, all while leaving the host machine clean. And so, yeah, thank you very much, Andrew, for all of that. I would say going forward, Vue 3 is about to come out. My understanding is that all the Vue 2 code will continue to work, but some things have been made quote unquote nicer. I don't know what that means yet, like the router. And so I will be patching and building things up to get this same level of functionality with Vue 3. One of the things to get excited about with Vue 3, half the size and faster. That's awesome. We should always be doing the simplest thing that can possibly work. We should be gearing towards, again, just really efficient, high-speed frameworks, and this is good stuff.
I think one other point I'd like to make is just that when Dorian had first completed Rapid Stack, he asked me to build some stuff on it as an experiment to see how I felt about it and see if I enjoyed it. And I told him I was a little bit wary of moving away from React because, React is hugely dominant in the industry. It's very popular and it's very good at its job. But, Dorian was absolutely right. He totally sold me on Vue, which is very young. But I think the modular nature of Vue is much more inclined towards the nature of programming and doesn't require you to juggle as much intellectually as to what's being rendered, that type of thing. It really allows you to consolidate, and it makes, I think, just developing front end in general just a much more programming-esque experience and less so a specific skill set that people have to learn. And I think that that's really, really powerful.
Now I'm going to slip into curmudgeon-y old developer mode real quick to say another reason, one of the things that makes me gravitate toward Vue, you see I have a file open here, a clear delineation between your markup and your code is logically organized between your model and your methods, right? And also it's very clear to see the application life cycle within a page, right? I like React. I work in React, but you can't say the same there. I'm just gonna say that. And Vue is very good about supporting very simple binding models. It is, it's one of those things of every tool for the job. I work almost every day in React. I work a lot in Vue as well, but it definitely is a thing of every tool for the job, and this was the right tool for this job. So I think, Nikki, do we have any more questions?
We do. So the question is, can Angular-based application be implemented in this Rapid Stack project?
So that's a good point. The nature of Rapid Stack is that there is everything is very clearly defined with boundaries, right? So we have a container that's hosting our Python and Flask backend. We have a container for Mongo. We have a container for Nginx to provide the hosting to all of this. But you could create your Angular front end, and you could change the Docker files so that it was hosting that instead. You could create your own development container that contained everything in the tool chain necessary for Angular, right? And you'd be good. But you could say the same thing about anything else in this stack. If you wanted to, you could create, instead of having that Python and Flash backend, you could create your own Docker file that stood up Micronaut, right? Or Node. Micronaut, if you don't know, is another very popular product that is created by uh, our company, OCI. And I will be going onto the core team of Micronaut here very soon. Very excited about that. It takes your Java applications, brings their memory footprint down to almost nothing, gives ultra fast startup times, builds natively. Good stuff. And while I'm plugging our company, I'll just say anything that you develop with this that you would like help with, or if you want ready to go to the next level, man, we are here for you.
Yeah, and actually, Mark Volkman, the man who wrote the book on Svelte, asked if we could, if there's any particular reason to do this in Vue as opposed to Svelte. I think that the first answer is I think Vue is just very quick to understand, but Svelte has lots of advantages to it, much in the same way that Dorian is speaking about using Angular or React. Svelte.
Well, we've lost Andrew.
We did lose, and while he's coming back, Mark Volkman really literally write the book on Svelte. I'm putting a link to that here
Right.
in the box.
Right. So again, with most of these decisions that were made, I was looking at two things. I was looking for something simple with a lot of guides. I wanted to think about this as kind of the Raspberry Pi of software. I'm trying to get something out there that students and anyone can use. You're starting with something functional to begin with, and you're just adding what you need to it. So all of this is to make software as accessible as possible.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I dropped out there for a sec. I think really what Dorian has done is he's opened up, Rapid Stack. Sorry, Rapid Stack is really just the first iteration of a trend line in full stack apps being not a hassle in general. Um, you know, Mean and Mern stacks are great, but Google online and look for like full stack Mern or full stack Mean, and there's 10 million different iterations, and it's not exactly clear what's going on in all of them. It's not exactly clear, how to stand them up. I mean, there's like create React app and all that, but again, there's a lot of esoteric files in there where it's not exactly clear what they're for, and there's just so much. There's so many different iterations of that system that they kind of all are. It becomes everything is designed around different standards, and there's really no unifying there's really no unifying full stack. Whereas what I think is so great about this is everything is already Dockerized for you. So swapping things out, switching out your front end, switching out your back end, they're not challenges of whole scale full stack integration, but rather just build the new front end and make it talk to the back end, which will be just a matter of Axios requests. It's really one of the cleanest I've ever seen the entire stack, where it's no longer confusing what is where. And I think that's the really big deal about this, and I think that's the part that new developers especially will benefit from tremendously.
Yeah, this is not the final word. I'm just trying to set a precedent. And if I get nothing else out of this than that the next project I roll onto, someone has Dockerized my tool chain, that'll be enough. If I don't have to spend an afternoon or even 2 days cobbling together an environment, that'll be enough for me. All of this, by the way, it's been said, I need to say it again. All of it's available. It is under the MIT license. You can take this and you can do anything with it. It is yours. You can do anything with it. Feel free to clone it. Feel free to put in an Angular front end if that's your jam. Feel free to move it over to Node if that's your jam, or bring it back to us to put Micronaut in. Whatever.
We've got a question about the GitHub account, and we can just drop a link to that to everyone who registered here after
Yeah,
this.
let's be good. Yeah, it's over on OCI Labs. Okay. I don't think that I have anything left that I can. I think that's it for me, folks.
Yeah, one last drop from me is just how lightweight this whole stack is. You know, I've talked a bunch about how few files there are, how little code it really takes to do all this. I think also from an overhead perspective, it's really important that you can run these apps on free AWS. You know, this is so lightweight that most cloud providers, their free tier offerings will be enough. So you could run this more or less indefinitely if you wanted to run like a quick app and even have it hosted in the cloud. So I think that that's really powerful and pretty unique as well.
Yeah, it's very easy to move all this into, for example, AWS. I mean, that's what it's built for. One of the things that I was thinking about when we did this traditionally as a company, we don't target really small applications that go to the cloud. And I wanted to give us a framework again as a company where we we can start targeting those things more easily and more efficiently. And again, one of the things that we've seen is that you don't need a team of developers. One developer, two developers, it's enough. Okay.
Well, thank you, Dorian, and thank you, Andrew. Thanks, everyone, for joining the webinar. So be sure to follow us on Twitter at Object Computing and visit our website at computing.com to stay up to date on all of our future events and webinars. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.